Welcome back, Focus Fanatics. Last episode was all about the Ford Focus Mark II diesel wagon. This time back to my roots, Ford Focus Mark I stuff, and of course this is a ST170. This thing needs a lot of TLC, that's why I've got these boxes, so let's get started. I'm really happy about this project because this Panther Black Ford Focus Mark I wagon was in my shed about 4 months ago, and I already checked it because this thing needs a new TÜV approval pretty soon. And as it stands right there, it won't get this TÜV approval, so time for me to do my magic. But basics first, as you already saw, Ford Focus Mark I, Panther Black, ST170. This thing came pretty good equipped from the factory, but it's got not all options. As you can see, the rear spoiler is missing and there's also no park distance control over there. Michael, the owner of this thing, won't sell this thing to me, unfortunately, but anyway, I will try to save this thing because every Mark I on the road is a good Mark I on the road. But without further ado, let's jack up this beast and then I can show you what's wrong with it. Here's my trustworthy lamp, so let's check out the focus. And being a Mark I Focus, of course, this thing got rust issues. First of all, front subframe is completely rotted. Second, driver's side rocker also rotted, and I think someone already tried to fix it, but with minor success. And there is another hole, so this rocker will also be replaced, or at least this corner. And speaking of rust, here we got a rusty oil pan, which has already been dripping. This is also a no-no at our TÜV approval station. This exhaust, I call it fix, would pass the tech inspection, but you can see it, it's just horrible. Another thing which won't pass are these bushings right over there. They are already been perished, so I need to replace that. And I need to replace the lower control arms because there are also bushings and they are also been perished. So as you can see, some major stuff, some minor stuff, but I want to tackle all of it. And first of all, I need to lower the complete front subframe, the front axle, and why, I tell you right now. Camera got a new battery, so here we go. First task of today is the removal of the complete front axle. As you already saw, there's a big hole in the subframe, but the control arms are also a little bit worn out, and the main issue is a completely worn out steering rack. You can turn the steering wheel about 2 to 3 centimeters to the left or to the right, but there's absolutely no transition to the front wheels. And after those 2 centimeters, steering is getting really hard. Then you can hear a loud ka-dong, and then steering is moving again, but this is absolutely horrible to drive, so I want to replace steering rack as well. And I don't want to replace the subframe separately and the control arms separately and the steering rack, so now I'm going to do what's best in my opinion. I will lower the complete front axle with everything attached because I already ordered some new parts right over here. First of all, removing the wheels, and we will see how it goes from there. so far I'm pretty happy because all the bolts I've touched came loose, at least most of them. Those two were pretty hard to crack, also those two, and I needed to grind the sway bar rod end off, but other than that, everything seems to be working up to this point. And now there is one part I'm really afraid of, and this is the power steering lines. Once again, here you can see the steering rack, and right over there, those two lines are for the power steering fluid. And the bolt itself isn't a problem at all. But those two lines can be a problem because often they are stuck solid in the steering rack. So wish me luck. I'll try to undo those two lines next.
A few moments later.
Unplugging those power steering lines are always a pain in the butt. 30 minutes later, I've got line number 1 done, and the fluid which came out aren't looking too good. This has to be a reddish color, but this is just black bluish. And right over here, I'll give you some light. There you can see line 1, as I said, is open, but line 2 is still in the steering rack. Sorry for the camera work there. And yeah, I think line number 2 will break off, but I'll give my best. Let's see what happened.
One eternity later.
Now I'm feeling about 10 years older, but it finally happened. I've broke both lines loose. I'm really happy about this. Only took, don't know, 2 hours or so. Next step should be a lot easier. Remove the whole subframe with everything that's still attached to it from the car. Finally, it's out, and I can tell you this subframe is the worst one I've ever had. Because, as you can see here, this thing is completely rotted through. Now imagine doing 50 on the freeway and this thing fell apart under your car. This isn't fun at all. Another thing that bothers me, somebody already took the effort to change this ball joint, but he didn't replace this bushing. And I mean, it's a Focus Mark 1. Parts aren't that expensive. Why he just couldn't replace the whole control arm? This way he could replace this bushing, and the ball joint as well. I don't get it. But anyway, next step, dismantle this front sway bar because I need to transfer this to the new subframe. I already begun to put the front axle back together. I mounted up the steering rack as well as the front sway bar, and I torqued the bolts down to spec. I won't fit the control arms right now to the subframe because the local hardware store has already been closed and I need some new nuts and bolts. I will fetch them tomorrow. So my plan now was to remove the rusty oil pan, but there's a problem as well. You see those tiny bolts, and those bolts are needed to mount the oil pan to the block. But some of those bolts are right above the catalytic converter, and the catalytic converter is in my way, and I can't remove that thing either because all nuts and bolts are rusted. And right over here I won't be able to get even a socket on it because look at this. Whoever welded that did a fabulous job. More or less. I mean, more or less. Yeah. Whatever. I'm now thinking about using the dev wheel to remove the catalytic converter, but yeah, give me a second. I know working on old cars contains always a little bit of rust, but this thing, woo, next level I guess. But I did it. Catalytic converter is out as well as the flex pipe. Over there I used the dev wheel, and over here with a lot of swearing I could finally get a socket over one nut. So there it is, and if you want something to laugh, I'm not a welder, not by any means, but I think this could I also accomplish. This is one pretty nice welding seam. Not. But anyway, let's move on to my rusty oil pan. Nearly done for day one. Oil pan is draining its guts right into my oil wagon, and after the oil is out of the pan, I will remove the pan. Then I will take one last cup of tea for today, and then I'm done for day one. And I'm done for day one. I finally removed the oil pan, and if you ever wanted to see this, there's the oil pickup, and right over there, this little doohickey there, this is the oil dipstick. You already saw me cleaning the surface for the new oil pan. I'll do this once again tomorrow, but first I need to get some sleep. I need to get some Scotch-Brite for the oil pan, and of course I need some screws and nuts, and I think the whole time I saw screw, but I think the correcter term should be bolts, or isn't it? I don't know, I'm a German guy. And I will get some new nuts and bolts, and then we can fit all those parts back to where they belong. Alrighty, day two of wrenching on this pretty cool Mark 1 ST170. I already finished up the whole front axle assembly. Control arms now in, all in with new washers, bolts and nuts. This thing just looks stunning. And another thing I already did was cleaning, whoopsie, the surface for the new oil pan. All grime, grease are removed, should do the job. But today I can't put it in because it's pretty cold, and the sealer I've ordered needs to have above 5 degrees of working temperature. So I'm going to do this on another day. And I also can't throw in the flex pipe today because, as I figured out just by now, the flange is bent. And ST170 parts these days are pretty hard to find, so I just ordered a new flex pipe, but this will also take some time. But in the meantime, I've got some other tasks to do, which I'm showing you right now, because the rear axle also needs some attention. You already saw those rear bushings which are shot, but another issue with this car are the rear dampers. This one is leaking, this one is still dry, but I am the guy who is always changing both sides of the dampers. But there's an issue. The owner of the car already replaced the front dampers, or they called shock absorbers, you know what I mean, hopefully, to some Bierstein dampers. But they are unavailable today and at least for the next 2 months. So now we are in December, and the earliest date that I can acquire a new pair are in the middle of February, and this sucks right now. So the owner just is on the way to me. He ordered some standard dampers for this car. I will throw them in and we will go from there. Right behind me you are seeing my best mate Daniel, and the problem with him is he don't understand one word English, and that's why he won't talk to you. But anyway, he is right now helping me. He already removed the right rear shock. I already removed the left one. The replacement parts just got in, brought to me by the owner, Michael. There they are. Now we are trying to remove the springs right over here and right over here, because I want to relieve the tension of the lower control arm, which I then will also unbolt. And I will also replace those tie-ins as well. springs are already out, also the shock absorbers, and now Daniel is trying to free the brake line because we need a little bit more leverage to get to those bushings. Same goes for the other side, which I am now trying to do. Here you can see the difference between the old bushing and the new bushing. There is Daniel, and he already pressed out the first worn bushing with his hand press, and now he will do the same thing but in reverse with a new bushing.
Day 3.
Starting to put it back together, at least a little bit. I've just mounted up the oil pan. It's just 4 degrees outside right now, so it will take a while to let this dry, and if it's properly sealed I will find out later when I fill in the oil. So, and as you just saw, Daniel and I was very busy right over here at the rear axle, and now it's the part I'm hating the most. I need to grab my dev wheel and cut those lower control arms out, because those bolts here, here and here as well are stuck solid in these inner bushings. First side is out, only took me half an hour, and now we go on to side number 2. I already could have been in the reassembling stage, but I don't, because Ford was stupid building the Mark I Focus, at least a little bit. Problem right now is this bolt. Normally there's a bolt going through the control arm right into this nut, and as you saw I already cut off the control arm, but now this nut is still on this control arm and this thing is welded to it, so I need to do some grinding work until this nut will fall off, and then I will replace it also with new nuts, bolts and washers.
12 seconds later.
And that's it. Final nut is grinded off. That's the remaining of it, and you can see right there where I cut off the bolt. And here are the replacements, same specs as the bolts and nut before. Now I'm having a break, and then I finally can start reassembly of this whole thing. Back from lunch I had a German Bockwurst, and now I can finally begin the satisfying thing of putting it all back together. Job number 1 is done, the rear axle is completed. Everything new and shiny, but not torqued up to spec, because this thing will get a complete wheel alignment for the rear axle as well for the front axle. And speaking of the front axle, that's the next job I want to tackle. This thing needs to go back in there, and if everything's fine, this thing will be on its 4 wheels today evening. Ready, set and go. There's the complete front axle, and this thing needs to go up in there. 3 bolts per side. Number 1, number 2 goes up here and here. There's number 3. This bolt goes up there. Shouldn't be too hard. I will now lower the car to the axle, and then with a little bit of fiddling there should be no problem at all getting this thing back to where it belongs. Axle is back in place, and if you are a car guy and it doesn't make you happy to see those shiny parts, I don't know what makes you happy. At the moment there's absolutely nothing talked to spec because I want to wait until tomorrow, because I will fit the flex pipe before I do so, but at the moment I've got no gaskets and the flex pipe is still at my girlfriend's home, so this is my first task for tomorrow. But look at this, I'm really happy. This looks absolutely amazing, and the most important thing, this should satisfy our TÜV inspector.
2 days later.
Another day, another try to get this thing rolling again. And if you are wondering why I am filming this episode only piece by piece, it's pretty simple. I am working in the grocery business, and as you know, Christmas is just around the corner, so I don't get very often the time to do something over here. But today this thing needs to be up on its wheels again, because tomorrow a buddy of mine needs to use my lift. So the plan for today evening is pretty simple. I will lower this thing right now on some jack stands, then I will torque up every suspension part, I will put on some wheels, and then I will push it outside the door. I can't drive right now because the exhaust gasket's still missing, and I forgot to order some power steering fluid. And this sucks, as you know. There's a whole new steering rack right inside this car, so this thing needs to be refilled up to its maximum level. This should do the trick. Car is sitting on jack stands in the front and in the back, and there's a little bit of support just in case of emergency. Next step is to tighten all the bolts down to spec. In the rear, the shock absorbers as well as the lower control arms, and in the front, control arms. Upper shock mount is a pain in the butt to torque to the right spec. You need 150 Newton meter, but there's absolutely no place to get some leverage over there. This is finally done, thank God. Also, I already torqued up the front. There's only one bolt, this one, which you need to torque down. The rest is static, so you can tighten it wherever you want. And this is what I'm going to do next. I'm lifting the car once again up in the air, and then I'm tightening all the axle bolts as well as all the tie ends. And finally, here it is. This thing is back on the ground. I finally could fill in some power steering fluid, but now the power steering pump, which is down there, makes some horrible noises. I think that's because of the wrong power steering fluid, which was in there. Unfortunately, I have to change the power steering pump probably in the next few days. We'll see what happens. But first of all, this thing will get a wheel alignment, because as you can see, this wheel is pointing to this side, this one is pointing to this side, and the steering wheel, left front, is also pointing, I don't know where, this also, but steering wheel, as I said, is dead centered. Not a problem, I'm still waiting on some new exhaust gaskets. So this thing is a little bit burbling right now, but I don't care. The alignment shop is just around the corner, and this is where I want to take this thing right now. So now we are at the end of part 1, but there are still some things to do. You might remember those rust problems, and there are some few bits and parts and pieces still missing, but I want to show you this in another episode. So this is end of part 1 for the ST170 rebuild. If you want to see what's going on in the next episode, just give me a like or a follow. If you got something to say, put it down in the comments. And as I always say, have a nice day and keep your focus.